Well, greetings, Bib 1001. What we are going to work on today is, at least in this segment, is the 7-day structure of Genesis 1:1 to 2:3. Don't know if you've ever stopped to think about it, but how do the days actually work together? So let me go to the board here, and you can kind of see a brief summary of what's created on each day. So day one, God separates the light from the darkness. So we got light and darkness, and God calls the light day. He calls the darkness night. So day one, creation of day and night, separates the light from the darkness. Day two, God separates the waters. So we got waters everywhere, but now on day two, God separates the waters and puts this kind of dome in here, a firmament, and so that we have the waters above and the waters below. And what this does is it creates kind of this atmosphere, the heavens, if you will, or sky. So we have this in here. I'll go ahead and put sky for now. And so the waters above and the waters below, and then the space that creates in there. And then on day three, God creates land and vegetation. And so God gathers the waters together and calls them seas, and then the dry land appears, and God calls forth vegetation from the dry land. Then on day four, God creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. The sun, the great light that's going to govern the day, the moon, the lesser light that's going to govern the night, and then the stars that are going to kind of govern the seasons, if you will. Day five, God creates the great sea creatures, the fish, and the birds. And then on day six, God creates animals. And of course, God creates us, humanity. God saw all that God had made. It was very good. And then on day seven, God rests. And so we have the 7-day structure here. Now, hopefully the glare is not too bad from the lights. What do you notice about the structure? And what problems do you see with the structure? So you're not here to talk to me, but I'm assuming that you're kind of looking at this kind of puzzled, like, now, wait a minute. How do you get, light and darkness, day and night, and 3 days of it before you ever have the creation of the sun? Like, that makes no sense, that you're going to have 3 days before the sun gets created, and that you can have light and darkness, and you can have light before you get the sun. How does that work? And I'm sure some of you are even thinking about the vegetation here. How can you have vegetation before you have the sun? Just doesn't make any sense. And so when I look at this and I think about this 7-day structure from kind of a modern perspective and what we know of science and how the world works, it just doesn't make any sense at all to me that the sun would be created on day 4, and yet you have 3 days before you get to the creation of the sun, and that you even have vegetation before you have the creation of the sun. Just makes no sense. Okay, but what sense is there in this? What logic is present? Do you see any logic present? What is the relationship of the days to each other? And I'm guessing that if you stare at it long enough, maybe some of you picked it up right away, then you're going to notice that there is a correlation that goes on between days 1, 2, and 3 and days 4, 5, and 6. So on day 1, God creates the light and the darkness, calls the light day, calls the darkness night. And what happens on day 4? God fills the day with the sun. God fills the night with the moon and the stars. So you have this kind of filling activity going on. Okay, or the day is the habitat for the sun. The night is the habitat for the moon and the stars. Look at days 2 and 5. You got the waters above and the waters below. You got the sky, this space that's created. What does God do on day 5? He fills the waters with the fish and the heavens, if you will, with the birds. And so you have this filling that takes place. Then on day 2, God created these habitats, the space, the sky, and the waters. Day 5, God fills that with the creatures that are going to move about, and God blesses them and tells them to be fruitful, to multiply, and to kind of fill their habitat. Day 3, land and vegetation. I know, you see it coming. What does God do? God fills the land with the animals and with humanity. So what we have going on days 1, 2, and 3 is the creation of habitats or domains, if you will. And then what happens on day 4, 5, and 6 is that God fills those habitats, fills those domains with the creatures that are going to move about and exercise dominion there. Remember, God gave humanity dominion over creation. And so here's the habitat. God gives the animals to fill it. They're provided for with the vegetation. Humanity, fill it, exercise dominion. The sun, the moon, the stars, they're going to fill the day and the night and exercise dominion. Very important to recognize God is not simply creating light. God is creating light that functions as day and night with the darkness. Okay, what does the sun do? Each morning, the sun kind of rises and runs across the day, and it exercises dominion over the day. Everything is under its heat and under its light. And at night, the moon comes out and the stars come out, and they kind of govern the night, and they move about the night and eventually give way to the sun, give way to the day. And so these are heavenly bodies, just like these are earthly bodies, and they move about in their habitat and exercise dominion. And so now you can see the logic that's here, kind of this correlation that's here, that yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense in terms of our scientific understanding of what the sun does and how the earth rotates around the sun and there's an orbit around the sun. So maybe it doesn't make sense in terms of our scientific knowledge today, but see the logic of it, that God first creates the habitats. And the very first habitat is kind of the habitat of time, if you will, day and night. And then what God does is he fills these habitats with the bodies that move about in those habitats, that live and exercise in those habitats and have dominion in those habitats. Okay, and then what happens on day 7? God rests. How does that work with the structure? Well, again, kind of thinking about John Walton's perspective, the lost world of Genesis 1, and how God rests in a temple. So what God has done is on days 1 through 6, God has built his temple, and then on day 7, God fills it. God rests. And so we have this pattern of creation of habitat and then filling, creation of temple, filling. And so what makes a lot of sense of what's going on with this 7-day structure and what the author was communicating, how the author was seeing things. We don't know exactly who that author is. We'll talk more about that probably on Tuesday. We can talk a little bit more about that, but for now, I want you to see the structure and how it works. And maybe one more thing with it. This idea, not just light, but day and night. What John Walton emphasizes is that our perspective of creation is way more materialistic than how they thought about creation. They were more concerned with function rather than material. So one way to get at that is we could think about, when did our class get created? And some might think, well, it got created when I got all my notes together. Maybe some are thinking that it got created when the university decided that everybody was going to take a Bible class, and Old Testament class, and a New Testament class. Maybe it got created then. Some of you might be thinking, no, I think the class got created when we actually registered. Well, from a Genesis 1:1 to 2:3 perspective, from an ancient perspective, our class was actually created on the day we started functioning as a class. So that first Tuesday that we showed up on Zoom and started meeting as a class and doing class stuff, that's when our class was created. that we weren't functioning yet when we were just in the registration system or just having the curriculum or even having it on Canvas. We weren't a class yet until we actually started meeting and functioning as a class. Okay, and that's kind of what's going on with the creation of light and day. God called the light day, making the light function. And so the assumption in Scripture is that God is the creator of all material. Nothing is here in and of itself. God is the creator. But they don't care that there's material. What they care is that it works. And that God created not simply a material world, but a functioning world. And Walton would go on to argue that that's really the chief idea behind God saw that it was good. God saw that it was working, that it was functioning as God designed it to. And so, yes, there's an aesthetic to it. Yes, there's a morality to it, but it's working. It's good because it's working the way God designed it to work. So, 7-day structure. Challenge you to explain this 7-day structure to a friend, to a parent, to someone. I guess you could explain it to yourself, but make sure you're able to see what's going on. No, it doesn't make a lot of sense from our perspective in terms of our scientific understanding of the world, but if we kind of step back in theirs, we see that God is creating these habitats, not just light, but the habitat of day and night, and the habitat of the waters below and the sky above, and the habitat of land filled with vegetation. And then on days 4, 5, and 6, God creates the creatures, the bodies that are going to move about and live and exercise dominion in those habitats. So the sun covering the day, running across the day, day after day, the moon and the stars at night, the fish and the birds, the animals and humanity. And finally, day 7, God fills the whole thing with his presence and rests here in creation. And it's a functional approach to creation. All right, well, that will do it for this little segment, and I'll shut this one down, and then we are going to talk about what it means to be created in the image of God.